For men violently harmed by women, there are virtually no local government or charitable resources to turn to for help, whereas for women, there are welfare services funded by the state.
And that if there's a phone line there in a county or a national phone line, anybody that's experiencing domestic abuse should be able to phone that line and get help.
It doesn't actually make sense drawing a distinction. It really doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
Do it for any other crime.
It astounds me.
For this.
It's like having a dentist. You wouldn't have a dentist for men and for women, and gays go to that dentist. You're white. Oh, you can't. That's just only for Asians. This one, so you can't go to that one. You can go to that one down there, but that's not open today. You know, that's rubbish. You're a human being, aren't you? It's a terrible waste of public money because it is not actually reaching out to all the victims that it should be reaching out to, and worse than that, it's excluding men. And if it's excluding men, it's excluding their children because their kids see it all. You know, when Dad's having the crap beaten out of him, or his wife's bottling him one, or she's giving him all the mouth and putting him down all the time, the kids are seeing all this, and in the worst cases, they're copping it as well. And I keep saying to the Home Office, and I say to Women's Aid or Women's Refuge, all right, I know you're only interested in women, but what about kids? Don't they count? You know, you might hate men, but what about their kids?
This is yet more hatred of men, but such is the commonality of such anti-male sentiment, you might not immediately see what I mean.
Of all the services available to assist domestic violence victims, only refuges are exclusively for whites.
It's strange how we don't appreciate how evil these modes of thought are, except when they're applied to other groups. Why is it only when you substitute men for any other group of individuals, blacks, Muslims, Jews, gays, the disabled, or indeed women, that words like this become a hate crime?
And the doctor there, she knew what was happening because I'd explained to her. She said quite blatantly, if you were a woman, you could take your children and you could go to a refuge. But as you're a man, there's nothing for you. There's often this image portrayed in the media that, you know, it's always the woman that's a victim, it's always the man that's the perpetrator, and that isn't the case. I think at the moment it needs to be recognised that men need help. I think the ideal thing is that there is equality, that if somebody is abused, whether they're a man or a woman, they know that they can go and get help. Abusers are both male and female, and there isn't a difference. Victims are both male and female, and there shouldn't have to be refuges for women and refuges for men. It should be that if you are abused, if you need the help, you can get it.
It's a social issue, but unfortunately the Home Office has made it a gender issue. And I would always argue, I don't even like getting drawn into statistics because I think it cheapens the whole thing. And I always say that if we are living in a truly equal society, then if only 1 in 1,000 victims is a man, he should be able to get the same sort of help as the 999 women. It shouldn't make any difference at all. If they are so keen that everybody, you know, gay, black, Jew, whatever it is, they've all got to be helped, they always seem to put a little line around men, and they, for some reason, are left out of it, and it's perverse.
It would seem that our society is currently engaged in drawing qualitative distinctions between the worth of a woman's life and the worth of a man's life, and men are coming in second every time. But maybe the BBC is not hating on men. Maybe I've misjudged them. So I looked into how the subject of homelessness is treated on the BBC. A little published fact of homelessness is that over 90% of homeless people are men. Homelessness is a very real and present danger for men. Many men are closer to this state than they might realise, particularly if they're involved in a relationship with a woman. If it comes to an end, the norm in the family courts is that she gets the house, which he pays for, and he gets his mate's sofa. So, with over 90% of the homeless being men, you might expect the BBC to mention this fact, and perhaps make a statement of the kind,
why this site refers mainly to men as victims of homelessness.
They did this with domestic violence, they'd surely do it with homelessness. But strangely enough, this isn't the case. If you search on homelessness on the BBC, they want to tell you how domestic violence leads to the homelessness of women. But we should look at what this actually means instead of what we're led to believe. Leaving out children for simplicity, the statement 16% of the homeless population does not mean that 16% of all homeless people are women escaping domestic violence. It means that of the 10% of homeless people that are women, 16% of those are women escaping domestic violence. That means 16% of 10%, or 1.6% of all homeless people may be women victims of domestic violence. A whole 1.6%. For this tiny group, the government leaps in with £9 million. This money goes to shelters and special schemes to help women, and only women, to get off the streets. A homeless woman only needs to claim that she's been abused by a man to gain benefit. In the meanwhile, the overwhelming majority of the homeless, men, are left to languish on the streets with neither help nor interest from the government or the news media. Many of these men are made homeless by court orders for domestic violence, preventing them living in their own houses, even when it's the women who've been violent.
It doesn't matter what if he's scratched and whatever, he's taken out of the situation because it's a positive arrest policy.
The Lancashire Constabulary policy is to effect an arrest where a power of arrest exists, and it's certainly drummed into officers that is the positive intervention and positive action that is expected of them at the scene of a domestic violence incident.
She said she'd hit him around the back of the head with something nasty and blood was flowing from the back of his head. So he called the police, and when the police got there, she just screamed and shouted, "Oh, he was going to try and kill me, so I did that to him." And the copper arrested him. He said, "Well, hang on, and of course, then he was done for resisting arrest."
Thanks to Harriet Harmans, a man can be found not guilty in a court of law, but the judge has a right to what's called a yellow card, and he can issue that to the man, and he can't, even though he's been found not guilty, go back to his own home and his children. How can we be making laws that do that?
The BBC would rather highlight how men might be responsible for the homelessness of a tiny group of women, rather than even mention the fact that enormously high numbers of homeless people are men. In light of this fact, it's somewhat surprising to see the picture of a woman heading up the site. The BBC then say that
homelessness can affect anyone. It can hit families and single people alike, young or old, men or women.
But this is quite obviously a misleading statement. If homelessness can affect anyone, then why are over 90% of the homeless men? What is it about the way our society treats men that means that they end up on the streets and women don't? And why is it that when percentages were 81% women to 19% men, which are the BBC figures for victims of domestic violence, the BBC simply dismissed the murders and other suffering of men in domestic violence incidents as a minority not worth discussing? But when the percentages are reversed, as with homelessness, the BBC tells us that it can affect anyone, men or women, and women are not dismissed.
People lose their homes for a wide range of reasons: falling out with their family, suffering from domestic violence, or being evicted by their landlord, to name but a few.
Why does the tiny incidence of domestic violence get headline billing? That's like saying,
people die for a wide range of reasons: old age, disease, and being trampled by elephants, to name but a few.